Good morning, good evening. It's our first official LoadPipe Foundation webinar. So this is going to be one for the records. We're going to be looking back at this in a long time from now, Bo, and reflecting. But I'm Mike McLeany, co-founder, CEO, foundation, and we have Bo here. He's our CTO, co-founder, and it's really exciting times. Yeah, we're jumping into 201. Actually, we did 101 last week. It was really fascinating with Bo, and it was an internal session. And we were just chatting about it, and we're like, why not just make this open for the community to see and to learn? So we decided to make this one our first public webinar, and will be recorded and archived for those that aren't here live. But for those here live, maybe if you could just chat in the chat box, practice the chat box. Oh, there you go. Jose, hello, fam. I think Venezuela, right? So great. Thanks for making it today. We want this to be interactive. You can use the chat box, or if you really want to raise your hand or say chat, you can come up on stage. You could come up and chat in camera or at least audio live, either during or maybe at the end. We can invite people up on stage. We can also have various engagements. We hope to do this more often. I think Bo even has a 301 in the works. So we want to hear your feedback about the time of this, about the format of this. I guess a little bit high level about LoadPipe. LoadPipe is a protocol that is in very early stages, testnet of e-commerce marketplaces that allows marketplaces such as our first official one, Hamza, to be able to allow people to do e-commerce transactions on the blockchain by having certain data available for a public blockchain to be able to transact and have reputation and escrows and various more power. And we'd love to hear your feedback. We're running a Project Raft right now, a testnet on Hamza. So definitely, we've also given people on our Discord. It's just started a couple days ago. So you're really at the very beginning if you're here live. So we definitely encourage you to go to hamza.biz. I think Bo will show some on his discussion today as well, so you can see it again. But doing it yourself will actually be very helpful because we'll be able to know your preferences and be able to know your wallet address for future benefits. So, Bo, what do you think? You ready to get started?
Yeah, ready to jump in. So here, I'll start by sharing my screen, and then let's jump over. So this is Blockchain 201, and this is part of sort of the continuing course that we're doing. That, like Mike said, was initially just like an internal sort of education program, but it's on sort of the stack of modern blockchain applications. And if you're not familiar, that stack is three components: settlement, execution, and data availability. And so you can kind of see this as the history of blockchains and how they've evolved over time, where Bitcoin was doing settlement and still to this day sort of does settlement well, along with a little bit of data availability stuff, ordinals, taproot, which we won't quite get into until the next session. And then things like Ethereum came along and introduced execution and statefulness to blockchains. And that's actually where we're going to focus today. But first, let's do a quick overview of Blockchain 101 for people who weren't there. So first, we talked about the anatomy of a SWIFT transaction, all the various intermediaries that go into making a transaction with Apple Pay, all the different levels of settlement that have to happen between banks, and then ultimately with Fed whenever you tap an NFC chip on one of the terminals. And we contrasted that with the anatomy of a Bitcoin transaction, right, where you have pretty direct peer-to-peer access and people act as their own banks, forwarding their transactions to the Bitcoin network. We talked a little bit about mining and what that looks like in terms of how block builders are chosen and given authority to add a block to the blockchain and then rewarded for it. We talked about validity of transactions. We went over public key cryptography. So this is the way that Bitcoin and all blockchains really separate public and private keys, is they use a scheme called public key cryptography, which is based on, a lot of math, the discrete logarithm problem, and so on and so forth. One-way functions. Best way to think about it, though, if you're unfamiliar, is it's as if you have a mailbox that anybody can insert a message into, but only you have the key to open the mailbox. And you're thinking about it with public keys. Basically, it's like sending a unlocked lock to someone who they can then lock and put on a box and send it back to you, and then you have the key to unlock the lock. And that's an analogy for public-private key pairs. And so this is what they look like in string form: public key and a private key for a Bitcoin paper wallet. We talked about the different kinds of wallets. We'll get a little bit more into MetaMask software wallets today, but also hardware wallets. And I'll pause here to say, anybody who's in crypto, if you don't have a hardware wallet, go and get one. I'm not even going to give you an affiliate link. Just go to Trezor and buy one. Probably don't buy a Ledger, but Trezor and Bitbox are the two that I will advocate. But you should have a hardware wallet. It's less secure than a paper wallet, but more secure than a software wallet. And they can be combined to store your private keys in a way that's a little bit more secure and a little bit less prone to hacking. So get yourself a hardware wallet. We talked a little bit about multi-signature wallets, and then you talked about takeaways, had questions and answers. But now that brings us up to blockchain 201, where we're going to dive into execution on blockchains. And what do we mean when we say execution? Well, let's first talk about what the Web 2 stack looks like, what a traditional web browser does. So you can see on the left the architecture of a traditional web browser where you have your front end built in HTML, CSS, React, JavaScript. That interacts with a backend server where you have your backend logic hosted. And that would be the logic that takes in data, takes in requests from your front end. It's like a REST API or GraphQL. And then it translates that to the database server, which again, you control. Maybe it's hosted on AWS or something like that. It takes the data from the database, transforms it however it needs to then present it back to the user. But you are in control of all these different aspects. You're the one that's hosting the backend, you're the one that's hosting the database. And in a decentralized app, it works a little bit differently. You can see from the diagram on the right, they're saying that you can host front-end HTML, CSS, JavaScript on IPFS, which is possible, not super performant. We'll get into that a little bit later. But you can see how the back-end logic is almost completely replaced by smart contracts, which run on the Ethereum virtual machine, which save information and retrieve information from the blockchain. So again, we're talking only about Ethereum at this point, but this was sort of the key innovation, that you could have back-end logic where you're processing information from your front end, where people are interacting with your contracts, and you could write that information to a blockchain. And then that could be universally read and universally analyzed. So it presents a couple of different concepts. First of all is to talk about
there's a do you mind I ask questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Jose, clarifying, I think it's true, but the right-hand side of that last slide was Web3?
Yeah, you could call it Web3. I mean, Web3, to be honest, is like a marketing term. I think people wanted to get away from the ICO craze and everything like that. But this is an ideal state of a Web3 app. In truth, there's still and again, this is getting a little bit into next week, but Ethereum layer 1 is not super efficient at doing execution, and even Ethereum layer 2s, which are more efficient at doing execution, are not great at storing data. So in truth, you can't really that setup doesn't make sense except for a small subset of very lean and efficient applications. Things like Uniswap, MakerDAO, Aave, they do very simple things. And so you can have all your backend sitting directly on the blockchain, but that's not typically the case for a modern Web3 application. But yeah, it would be what people call Web3, I would say.
Great.
So let's talk a little bit about statefulness. And so this diagram illustrates the difference basically between Bitcoin and Ethereum in terms of how they track transactions. Both Bitcoin and Ethereum, blockchains in general, are write-only databases. You can think of them as just a write-only database. The only thing, and again, I'm not going to talk about Taproot, but before Taproot, the only thing that Bitcoin recorded was transactions. It didn't record account balances, it recorded transactions. And so you could see what an account balance was at any given block based on the transactions that had flowed in and out of it throughout the history of the blockchain. But it didn't have there wasn't a simple lookup table in the blockchain itself. Now, you can contrast that with Ethereum. Ethereum exists on the basis of statefulness, where account A is mapped to the number 10, and that's its account balance. And when a transaction happens, what's really happening is it's executing an opcode to decrement account A and increment account B. So instead of just having a straight record of transactions and finding consensus around that, Ethereum finds consensus around states. And that allows it to execute various opcodes within the EVM, which stands for the Ethereum virtual machine. So there's all kinds of different state transitions you can do in Ethereum, but state transitions are a little bit more complex sometimes. Sometimes those state transitions require you to deploy a whole new smart contract. Sometimes you're allocating memory. Simple transactions are the most gas efficient, but more complex transactions cost a lot of gas. And so, whereas in Bitcoin, you just pay a fee to have your transaction included. That fee is not variable. The fee is variable based on what other fees people are paying, but it's not variable based on the type of transaction or the complexity of transaction that you're using. Because again, Bitcoin transactions can't really get all that complex. They don't have the state transitions that the Ethereum virtual machine does. And so in Ethereum, because you have more complex transaction types, you have variable levels of gas that you'll spend in doing a transaction, and gas is what determines whether or not your transaction is included in the block. You have a similar fee market where miners will choose transactions with higher fees to include in blocks. But this mechanism of choosing which transactions to include is actually a point that we will likely get into in the question and answer session a little bit later. But again, it introduces this concept of gas and variable gas limits based on the kinds of transactions that are being conducted. So next, let's talk a little bit about the history and a little bit about token standards. So this is sort of an outline of what different token standards have come along over the years. And token standards are ways, like standard ways of writing contracts, smart contracts on the Ethereum blockchain to accomplish similar things. We'll focus today mostly on ERC20 tokens because that's like sort of the first iteration of popularity. So Ethereum was launched in 2015. Around 2016, 2017, that's when people start referring to things called like the ICO boom. So you can see here mid 2017 into early 2018, the Google searches for ICO went off the charts. And you can see a similar thing happening at the end of 2020 with NFTs. And again, both of these are governed by just how you represent this data on chain. How do you deploy a contract of this standard, a fungible versus a non-fungible token? And the beauty of and I'll go back to this real quick, the beauty of being able to release a token is that you can do monetary policy. So you can create incentives within a system that wash around a token, and you can incentivize the kind of behavior that you want people to engage in. And some projects are much better at it than others. In late 2017 and early 2018, most tokens were functionless. They didn't really do anything. It's just they were alternate funding mechanisms for people. So people realized that you could build out a smart contract which kept track of the number of tokens that were held by any individual person, and then they used that. They sold those and got a lot of money. And there was a lot of scams. A lot of people ran away with that money. But this has a lot to do with, again, the way Ethereum holds states. It doesn't just hold states of its native ETH. It can also hold states of any arbitrary object. So if you think of these A, B, and C's as just the token balance of X token that we choose to launch, Ethereum will also track it in the exact same way. So if you can keep track of states rather than just transactions, then you can launch tokens, and you can launch either fungible tokens, which all look exactly like one another, or non-fungible tokens, which each have unique values or pictures or whatever you want to call it. So that was at the end of 2017. During that time, there was this concept called the DAO. And the DAO was the very first DAO which stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization, launched in the Ethereum ecosystem. And the history of the DAO is an important one in understanding like the functionality of Ethereum and smart contracts in general, because the DAO was the first time where people could pool money in exchange for tokens and then use those tokens to vote on proposals, right? So the smart contract, is that the comments or is that just me? It's just me.
Well,
Here, hold on.
just you, yeah.
So the DAO team assumed that they would raise like $1 to $10 million, but they ended up with $120 million in their treasury after their initial launch. And so people were buying I believe the conversion rate was 1 Ethereum, which at the time was about $20 for 100 DAO tokens. And so they sold $120 million worth of this. And they built within this smart contract the functionality to craft a proposal. And then they also crafted the functionality to vote yes or no based on the number of tokens that you had in the DAO to execute the proposal, which was to give money to an address. I mean, that was sort of the simple construct of it. You had money in a pool, and you could create a proposal to give money to someone else, and you could vote yes or no on that decision. And the idea was that it was going to be this like sort of huge venture capital fund for funding dApp development and the Ethereum ecosystem and everything like that. But if you're unfamiliar, it ultimately was hacked. And the Ethereum devs at the time decided to roll back the chain and refund people their money that they had put into the DAO. And this obviously caused a lot of consternation. A lot of people think the blockchains ought to be immutable. At the time, Ethereum was still quite young, and about 11% of the total supply of Ethereum was locked up in the DAO contract, which the DAO hacker was like actively draining. But they rolled back the contract on Ethereum, and that's what caused the hard fork between Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. So Ethereum and Ethereum Classic both exist as a result of the DAO. And basically, the way to look at it is on Ethereum, the DAO hack never happened. There wasn't ever a DAO. There was only ever a contract which allowed you to deposit 100 DAO tokens and receive 1 ETH. So you could redeem your DAO tokens for the underlying ETH collateral. And that's the only function of the smart contract. So they replaced it in the history of the blockchain. Ethereum Classic, however, the DAO hack happened. And the DAO exists, and it exists in its classic state. And the DAO hacker has all that Ethereum Classic as a result.
I put it up there. I don't know. Do you want questions now or
yeah, go ahead.
So I put it up on the screen. I don't know if you can see it, but Jose asked again. I think it was a little bit earlier before the DAO, but he says a huge amount of data in ETH blocks. All states' individual addresses for each token are recorded in a block. I don't know if you understand the question.
So state transitions are what, when you think about it like this, Ethereum holds states in blocks, but basically what it's recording is state transitions. So it records like the movement of one state to another and the valid execution of a function call. And so similarly, so not all states are held in every block, but a new state transition, there's like the EVM is a representation of the state. It's about how like it stores the data on the blockchain. So new states would be represented in the block rather than just transactions. So yeah, going back to this diagram of how decentralized applications work, you can see that like what this empowers you to do, this like Web3, for lack of a better term, paradigm allows you to do is to write simple logic that exists on chain. But that simple logic, once you write it, is enshrined forever. When the DAO launched their DAO, once it was on chain, you can't change generally the smart contract that you've built. And so the logic that exists continues to exist even if it's hackable. And it's very hard to revert changes outside of a hard fork like this, which most dApps will probably not be able to do. So let's stop talking about dApps that didn't work and start talking a little bit about dApps that did. I'll give you an example of what a functioning Web3 app looks like. So this, for anybody who's unfamiliar, is a simple overview of the Maker protocol. The Maker protocol is what governs the DAI stablecoin. And you can see there's some very simple functions, right? A borrower will provide collateral, an over collateralized amount of Ethereum to the maker smart contract, and they will be issued a loan of 1,000 DAI. Like in this case, right? They'll be issued a loan based on the collateralization ratio of their underlying capital. In a normal scenario, someone may just like repay their loan. It accrues interest as time goes on. And so say they repay 1,020 DAI, and then they unlock the ETH, which had been locked in the contract. Now, why would someone do this? It allows you to go long and bet on ETH. You can take your 1 ETH, get your 1,000 DAI loan, and then you can use that to buy ETH and sort of leverage yourself up. You can also just take loans against your ETH collateral if you happen to have a lot of it, and just pay back the loan slowly over time, maybe for tax purposes, because in the United States, loans are not taxed. And so it's a way to take sort of the Ethereum that you have, and you can have a low collateralization ratio and pretty safely take out some money as a result. If, however, your loan falls under a collateralization ratio, say the value of ETH goes down versus the DAI that you have, there's an automatic auction system which will liquidate your vault and bring it back into a good collateralization ratio, or at least the accepted collateralization ratio. Plus, it will penalize you for having engaged the auction system. And all this runs automatically. The only thing that the governors have to decide is they have a weekly governance poll which changes parameters on the system itself. So they can change states within their smart contracts to change like what is the interest rate, which they call the stability fee. You can change the collateralization ratio of various collateral types. They can also change the oracles that are feeding in price data so that their automatic auction system works. And so you can see they have a 10-day governance cycle where they take a poll about what sort of things, parameters that need to be changed within the system. They review the poll, they deploy it to a test net, then they deploy it to the main net, and then they vote on it, and it's implemented, and it'll change various parameters within the system. And so you can see you can govern some very simple things on your smart contract. You can change states of variables, but you can't change the logic of the overall system. So the logic of the overall system needs to be without bugs, but you can implement governance systems that change parameters of how those underlying systems work. And for that, you need tokens. Now, the last thing I'll say is that the last point to make here is that this all begs the question of how much execution can happen in a single block. Blocks are limited in space, so only so many transactions can be included per second. And this is what's called the blockchain trilemma, where you can only pick two of these three things, right? If you pick decentralization, then you can either pick scalability or security. If you pick scalability, you either pick security or decentralization. So you could think of alternate layer ones in this like sort of execution environment, smart contract platforms, as going one way or the other in these different directions. So Solana, for instance, is very scalable, but not very decent, and very secure, but not very decentralized. The hardware requirements in order to run Solana nodes are very, very high and expanding more and more every day. And so it makes it very inaccessible for a random person to just spin up a node. Also makes it very expensive to spin it up in cloud environments. And Ethereum, however, chooses to go away from scalability and towards security and decentralization. So heavy on Byzantine fault tolerance, and then also limiting block size so that people can easily run light nodes or full nodes, you sort of from anywhere in the world and with a lot of different configurations of hardware. That means that they have to come up with another solution for scalability. And their solution so far has been to introduce layer 2 chains. And so these are execution environments. So like Optimism, Arbitrum, Polygon, all of these are places where it's a lot cheaper to execute smart contract transactions, and then they're ultimately settled to the main chain. You can think of it as zipping a bunch of different smart contract state changes and then writing them to the layer 1 eventually, right? So the layer one of Ethereum basically will keep a record of the state of all the Optimism smart contracts and execution environments, and Optimism will write all of them in batches at once so that it limits the amount of block space. And so then the gas fee that they're paying for all the state changes of their contracts get distributed to all the people who are batching transactions at a time, which lowers the fees for all people, which is how Ethereum is handling the scaling problem. So I'll open it up now, questions and answers, and I'll stop sharing my screen, or I won't. Yeah, I'll stop sharing my screen.
Okay, great. Or people can come up. I know Jose's always got great. Maybe I'll send him an invite if he wants to take it. But yeah, if you could leave it in chat, or if you want to raise your hand and come up. Maybe while we wait, I could just start. So the idea of what we're learning is, of course, for everyone's just general knowledge, but also we're applying these types of technologies to e-commerce industry with the load pipe protocol and the Hamza marketplace. So the idea of these DAOs and other tech we can use within the e-commerce and within this e-commerce ecosystem and community, right?
Yeah, so that reminds me, I was gonna walk through a transaction on Hamza real quick and walk through like what it looks like to. Okay, so let's do that. So I was just gonna share my screen to look at the Hamza site, and I think my wallet's already connected, but basically this is the process you would go to connect your account. Now I'm in the admin dashboard, and then let's go to Hamza. And so, if you look at, I was like, let's grab testnet ETH, which was something that I hadn't showed people how to do before. Basically, first you want to install MetaMask, and then you can copy your wallet address. You can throw it in. This is the leafaucet.com, which is the alchemy faucet. And you can just ask them to send you ETH.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Faucet. People didn't know yesterday what a faucet meant. Faucet is a way to get free, I guess, money or coins to test things. So it's not real money. It's not real Ethereum. This is test Ethereum.
Yeah. So this is Ethereum on the various test nets. So this is the Optimism Superchain faucet. And so Sepolia is the name of the test net. So Ethereum mainnet. You also have Ethereum Sepolia, which is another test net. And yeah, people will give out, there's a bunch of different places. You can see I have a bunch of different faucets here that I go to quite a bit to just get a bunch of different versions of ETH so that I can deploy contracts and send it to people. So also, yeah, if you happen to be on our Discord, then you can send me a message and I'll send you ETH. I have so much testnet ETH.
Yeah.
But let's go through the process of buying a product on here. Add it to cart, view cart, and then proceed to checkout. And this UI is like not quite perfect yet, but like I need to add USDT, for instance. But let's say OP Sepolia testnet. Let's switch networks. Pay with crypto wallets. Confirm the transaction. And we can even like take a look at the block explorer and see, okay, transaction's already a success. It'll probably wait for a couple of more block transactions to actually finalize. But yeah, there we go. Payment received, everything like that.
Awesome. So there's, Jose's got a bunch of questions from this screen.
Okay.
And Marley, also you're welcome to come up on stage if you'd like to speak in audio or video. I'm going to read from the top. Quick question. The login was, there's no sign up button, only sign in. So that's on purpose, right? I mean, there's not, when you sign in, you're not really signing up. You're just connecting your wallet. I mean, there's no real sign up in Web3, right? You're already signed up into the, am I saying it right or?
Yeah, so I mean the reason for that is that like the MetaMask wallet handles your private keys. And so when it connects to a website, it is like uniquely like you have the unique identifier of your public key. And so that's all we really need to sign you in, more or less. when you're signing up in a different system, you have like an email backup, and they need to align your email and your password through like an OAuth provider. And we don't need to do that. We can just connect to your wallet and see what the
Yeah.
public key given to us by the wallet is, and then we can use that to determine which user is logged in.
Basically, your wallet's your identity across all of Ethereum or all of that one blockchain, right? So if you're on Solana or Bitcoin or whatever, your wallet is your identity, and you're just granting access to Hamza or whatever decentralized application to be able to like connect to it. That's kind of a fundamental difference also about Web 2 and I guess Web 3 is you are already you're an individual or a company. You're connecting to a dApp, but you're not creating your identity on the dApp. It's your identity connecting to it, but you already have your identity. You're not creating a zero feedback, fresh account. You already have a wallet, and you're simply authorizing the wallet to be connected to Hamza.biz. I hope that makes sense.
So yeah,
Or
so I'll
is
keep
that
going. Are
correct?
all
Or
those testnet? Yeah, I mean more or
you know,
less.
you see the question.
Are all those testnet ETHs equivalent? Yeah, they're all worth nothing. The only like testnet ETH that has some value is called Gurley ETH. There's a protocol called Layer 0, which allows you to like bridge Gurley ETH and actually temporarily give it a price. So Gurley ETH is being deprecated, so the Gurley testnet eventually go down. But yeah, all those ETHs are equivalent in the sense that they are the gas fees that you need to conduct transactions. But yeah, I mean, when things are when you're doing testnet transactions, typically oracles will just assume that it's the same price as current ETH, because like, or else it would throw off a lot of calculations from price feeds and everything like that. And so they're generally like mapped to the same price as live ETH, but not in all cases. And
I
then
guess the developers, like I know you and the developers been talking about which testnet to use. I don't know I don't know. I guess it's not necessary, but of course there's only two that we are using in the Hamza testnet, which is Sepolia ETH and Optimism test ETH. I mean, so it's also of course up to the developer of the dApp. So in Hamza's case, it's those two. So you have to use those two. You can't use others. And I'm not exactly sure how it's decided, but I don't think it's necessary to get into that granular detail.
Well, and we're not, like, we haven't really come down on a decision yet. We've been gravitating towards optimism, Sepolia, and towards optimism in general. But I think we still have a lot of work to do before figuring out like where we're ultimately, because there's some arguments to be made that it could be a Cosmos app chain, or it could be spun out as its own app chain in the optimism ecosystem. And there's plenty of other places that it could go, and those are discussions I think that we still need to have. But yeah, as of right now, we're thinking optimism for a lot of different reasons, but we'll see. I'm not the biggest fan of optimistic rollups, and so it's even possible that we end up on a ZK rollup. Laura Lee says, thank you so much for this presentation. Wanted to know about the way you're going to set up your DAO. Is it going to be governance for both LoadPipe and Hamza, or is the DAO just for LoadPipe, or is it two DAOs? So the short answer is not sure yet. We're thinking about this question of whether or not there needs to be protocol level governance. Again, back to that like sort of maker example. Are there parameters that need to be set for the protocol? Do we want to give ourselves power to set those parameters at the protocol level? That's sort of a question we haven't just decided the answer to yet. I mean, if you take a look at like Rye is a good example of a collateralized algorithmic stablecoin with a governance minimization module. So they built it on the basis of single collateral DAI, but they implemented what's called a PID controller to regulate the redemption price and keep the coin stable relative to ETH without pegging it to any fiat currency. I think Rye is an incredible innovation, and if you don't know about it, you should go and look it up. Rye is really cool. But because they left it as a governance minimized thing, they couldn't actually add new collateral types to their vault structure. So it was only Ethereum that you could add to the vault and create stablecoins out of, which means that the system now always has a negative interest rate because people would always prefer staked ETH. They would prefer some liquid staking derivative, which is getting them 5% yield per year. And so when you're basically running a central bank, like it means that your system is sort of out of date and your coin is always going to have a negative interest rate. So they moved to optimism, where they introduced HAI, HAI, which now has like liquid staking derivatives. But this illustrates sort of the point of like, on one side, we want to minimize the amount of control that we have over people's commerce at the protocol level, because we see it as sort of a slippery slope to centralized control in general. But on the other hand, it's like we have to leave some level of control, even just to add things we didn't anticipate in the short term. So I think the real answer is probably there will be two DAOs, but one of them might disappear. So the protocol DAO might disappear over time, but marketplaces will always be DAOs with a lot more control over what goes on in the marketplace.
And I just want to add, I hope everybody appreciates us. We're being more, as I think this is pretty open and transparent. We're also pretty early. We could have waited to even do this webinar, could have waited to have the test net open. We wanted to build with you all involved. So especially if you're here on this first public webinar, it's only day 2 or 3 since we've announced the test net. We want you to be part of this. You're not just Web3 or decentralized. We want the community to be part of the decision making. And we want to hear from you. We want you to participate. We don't have like a formal governance structure right now for voting and such, but of course, just as simply as joining in the Discord, even in the main chat channel, just giving us some suggestions, even filling out the survey. We had a little meetup yesterday here in Thailand, and people were giving good questions. So I really hope that we're not making it where when asking the team when this, when that, when this. Of course, it's too early for really too much decentralization because it's just really beginning, but we want people's feedback. We want to know what, especially within the e-commerce ecosystem, sellers and buyers are interested in and not interested in, so that we can build what you want, but also have you part of it in general.
And then, yes, Jose, for practical purposes, most testnet ETHs are equivalent. Yeah. Of a transaction, you showed how a payment was made, but in real transaction between sellers and buyers, there will be an escrow system, right? How will that be handled through load? So initially, the way that we're going to do escrow in the testnet, so the transaction at this point, all of them go to my testnet wallet. So all the Sapoli ETH just goes straight to me. And you can request a withdrawal, and then I can decide whether or not I want to give it to you. But again, it's testnet ETH, so. But what we're building right now is that escrow system. Yes, exactly. That's why I have so much. But the escrow system that we're building right now basically is just a multi-sig, right? And so what it is there's 3 parts. It's a 2 of 3 multi-sig system. So we basically put the transaction in a wallet, and that wallet can release either to the buyer or to the vendor. And in the best case, the buyer will sign that they received it, and the vendor first the vendor will sign that they sent whatever the item is. The buyer will sign that they received it, and then the transaction will go through to the vendor, right? In the worst case, the vendor will sign that they sent their transaction, or sorry, that they sent their item, and the buyer will say, no, I never got it, or this, that, or the other thing. And that's where we have our third signer, which is initially just going to be us. It's going to be an internal team that's reviewing, much in the same way. I believe, Jose, you might have a little experience with this, but eventually we'd like to kick that to a more like Claros-like system. We were talking about this last night, about whether or not we're going to just build out sort of an in-house judging system, which will like incentivize people with whatever the protocol token ends up being, or if we want to kick it to another service like Claros, right? Or if we want to allow it to be modular, right? Because I know like Aragon used to have justice protocols. And so there's like a couple of people who are trying to solve this problem. I don't know actually any of them who survived besides Claros. But yeah, so it's a multi-sig where the third party is our dispute resolution system. And initially the dispute resolution system is just going to be handled internally. I think when we go to like live release, we'll have a more robust solution. But like while we're in testnet, we're going to test it out as if we're the arbiters. And then we can just point who the arbiter is to a different smart contract or to a different person down the road.
Okay, just to summarize, so that maybe if I at least I hope I can maybe say it more for the e-commerce seller mindset. But imagine the community is actually the arbiter, just like he's saying. Maybe somebody could apply to be an arbiter, and then that person could even be paid in the ecosystem for being the arbiter, not like somebody hired in our company, but it's a community member. And it's not just one, maybe there's a pool of like 1,000 of them or 100 of them, and there's a dispute and it's raised to that arbiter. And then maybe that arbiter decides unfavorably to the way the public thinks it should have been. That arbiter potentially could be reviewed. You understand? We're trying to make like a democracy. The core. I try to be more high level. The idea here is we're trying to make a transparent e-commerce platform and ecosystem, because we feel the platforms now like Amazon, TikTok, etc., are a black box. We sign up for their system, like Jose said, we use your email and your password, and there's a very important one called the TOS. There's a huge block of text that you don't read, that you just check off, and you start from zero on that platform with zero feedback, zero orders, and you build your history and you build your reputation. But then sometimes there's a dispute that comes up, which is normal, right? There's always disputes in e-commerce or business, but it's all within this black box. So we're trying to take this black box and open it and let everybody generally see the inside process of a dispute of that, and then instead of paying through like a salary through a Web2 company, that person's paid through the blockchain, through the incentive structures of this DAO governance, like he was showing the maker DAO, and there was this ecosystem of like, it's an ecosystem for e-commerce. So we would make some kind of incentive mechanism for people to arbitrate disputes, and they would be compensated for their time. And if they're a bad arbiter and people complain and bring it up to the DAO, they could lose their role if they're doing this for the wrong reason.
I mean, that's one possible implementation. I think I will say I don't think we fully sketched it out yet.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're very early with it. This is just trying to give people some ideas of what Bo talked about MakerDAO and things like that. So we're at the very core, we're trying to bring this technology that's somewhat getting more and more established in the Web3 ecosystem and bringing it to the e-commerce industry and community, which are people here on this call. So we're really trying. You talked about a little bit about Purse. That's what Purse worked on for 9 years. We're trying to bring utility to the blockchain by buying and selling physical products using, of course, not just Bitcoin now, but cryptocurrencies and blockchain technologies, etc. And we really want to do that with everyone here. Okay, Jose sending more links. I don't know if we bring that up, Bo, or maybe we could look at that internally. There's some links he's sharing. All right.
No, I'd be fascinated to read this up. Yeah.
We could save it, or maybe share that in Discord, or because we might lose this chat in the end of the call. I think we're getting towards the end. Again, this was a 3-part series. We did the first one internally. We decided to make the second one public, and there's 301. So you're thinking next week, Bo? We didn't pick a date yet, but next week?
Yeah, sometime. I think next week we'll dive into like data availability and how modern solutions to hosting data outside of just like an Amazon S3 buckets. Because again, like you need all three. You need to be able to execute transitions. You need a settlement of transactions, because again, blockchains have sort of a implicit money system, right? So you need a transaction layer, you need an application execution layer, and then you also need a data availability layer. And it doesn't make sense typically to store data in the same layer as you're executing transactions. So we'll talk about the modern innovations in data availability of blockchains next week. Jose, I'd love to dive into voting theory and a little bit more. So if you want to share any more links in like the in the Discord and talk a little bit more about it there, I mean, that's my whole thing is governance. So yeah, let's dive into that. I would also be down to hear you give a talk on it.
Yeah, Jose, you can maybe do a session.
Doing some research.
Yeah, maybe you could even do a sharing. We'd love to have this kind of like as a platform for like, maybe it could be a regular kind of webinar series with others in the community too, to share their knowledge and relevant to e-commerce and blockchain. But I think we should wrap up for today, about 1 hour.
And I will say one final thing. So one final thing I will say about this, and sort of speaks to both Jose's questions, is summarize my question on the escrow and escrow system is not implemented on Project Rep. No, we're close actually. So the escrow system is actually on our test net. So we have a test site, hamza.oem6.com, which is where we test things before we push them to production. And so we're internally testing like the escrow system and the smart contract batching there, and we're going to push it to hamza.biz. I mean, in the next week, most likely.
Yeah. Okay.
But the thing I wanted to say was that like one thing to note is that like when I think about these marketplaces, I do think of them as their own sorts of constitutions. I do think of them as like the marketplace has a governance system which is doing legislation over the regulation of commerce at its core. It's deciding a tax rate and it's deciding which kinds of commerce are illegal and illegal. And then you also have a dispute resolution mechanism, and that dispute resolution mechanism is one that's justice, right? That is a court of justice. And the only thing that's missing is an executive team, right? The DAO is the executive, right? And when the DAO needs things done, maybe sometimes appoints an executive, but there's no president. So the executive branch is sort of the thing that doesn't exist. But you do have a legislature and you do have a judiciary. And in that sense, we're building like sort of a constitution. And I'd like that to be as open a process as possible. So if you'd like to come in and you feel like you can contribute and you have some ideas as to how we should be acting and how what our constitution should look like, what individual constitutions should look like, what the template for constitution should be, that would be help. That would be really appreciated and really valuable, because these are like really big, complex problems that we don't that are too big for like one person to come up with solutions to.
Okay, so also just expand on the roadmap and where we are and what features we have. So we didn't want to keep on being behind closed doors. We wanted to open the doors. And there's a saying about Reid Hoffman from LinkedIn. He says, if you're not embarrassed by your first product, you waited too long. So yeah, I mean, the raft currently is not at all representative of what we envision in the long term, but we wanted to have something open for the community to look at and test and give us feedback. Actually, I think it was worth it already in the last 1 or 2 days. We're just trying to understand, do you even have a MetaMask or Ethereum wallet? Do you think you would want to use cryptocurrency to buy and sell your physical products? What other questions do you have? So I think it was very helpful, but yeah, it's a very limited raft. So right now is Monday, January 29th. We will launch Project Raft. So we're working very hard to mid-March as the next rather bigger technical update. There will be stuff in the middle. We have some fun things in the middle between now and March 8th, but we're calling it Project Team Boat. And Project Team Boat will be a more extensive. Again, I don't want to put too much pressure on Bo and our amazing developer team, but we're going to have a nicer upgrade. It will be a different framework, and it will be a different look and feel to the current Hamza. I think you even saw with Bo's screen share. It's on WordPress right now. We're going to rebuild it onto React just to be a little bit more transparent. And we hope to have a little bit still on testnet, but like with what Jose said about escrows and maybe other kinds of features, that would be in the March update. For right now, there's no escrow. It's just Bo's getting rich off testnet ETH in his wallet. And there's no dispute resolution right now. He's got to contact Bo for your money back. So I hope this helps. So this is some imagery, right? We're on this raft, and this is hopefully you here with us. We want to be with us on this raft. You can go through map.loadpipe.com. And you can go through the map. This is the global map. We're still at just phase 1. You can also watch our video. But we escaped this Web 2 empire, and we're now into the underground river called Hamza. And we're going onto this raft. This is us, right? This is us. So it's just not Bo and I, but you watching. We want you to be part of this endeavor, and you're helping us test this raft. And hopefully it doesn't sink or break. But if it does, we're learning and we're improving. So also make sure you take the survey on the raft. There's a survey link. There's different things you can do. This is the survey. We'd love to hear your feedback. We'd love to hear what you like or you don't like. And we'll also, of course, be monitoring those that are helping submit quality feedback for long term. Okay. Okay. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Nicholas Toft. Thank you. Yes, exactly. Thanks for. Yeah, we wait. So we didn't want to wait. Of course, especially the amazing developers. I wanted to show we're a little bit embarrassed of this product. At least I'll say I am embarrassed of this current raft. It's not what we want to be long term, but we wanted to get something for you to play with and give feedback on and test. And I think already even the last couple of days has been doing that. Okay. Any other? I think yeah, this is great. So we'll do this again next week. I don't know if this time is good for everybody. Is this time okay? Like maybe we can almost same time next week, maybe?
Would a little bit later be okay?
I guess it seems like most people are. I guess we got to figure out what time zone people are on. You're also missing out on the people in Europe because it's the middle of the night in Europe.
Well, maybe we should implement some sort of poll on Discord.
Yeah, we should do a poll. That's a good point. Maybe we'll run a poll about what time. Yeah, we're really trying our best to practice what we preach about governance and community. I think Bo is very serious about it. I'm serious about it. We want you as a community to be involved in even these calls. What time is the best? So let's maybe run a survey the next couple of days in Discord, and we'll pick the time for next week. Thanks, Bo. It's really great, and I can't wait for 301. See y'all.
All right, everyone.
Okay. Thanks, Nicholas. Great.